Howdy folks. Today we are going to look at how to do conditionals and loops in React in JSX, as well as hopefully how to handle APIs and calling APIs. So what we've got here is I've got a very brand new app, nothing here. I've got a backend for it that just has a very simple server. It's got a users list with an ID. I can call get users to get all the users, and I can, well, that should be post user, to create a new user and add that to the system. So because we have a React server and a React client, we need to start them up separately. So React, when you're developing React, you usually do it via Webpack or whatever build system you're using. And that's going to be one command, and that's going to start on one port, and that'll actually show the front end. Then if you want the back end, you actually have to run the back end as well, which will do the back end. So I'm actually going to make two terminal windows. So the first one, we're going to say, okay, npm start, okay, and that's going to start up the server through nodemon, so it auto restarts. Then I'm going to add a new terminal, and then I'm going to run dev. And what that's going to do is that's going to run a webpack serve, which is going to have a hot reload for webpack, and I'm running at 8080. So now what that means is that my server is at 9090, my client is at 8080, not uncommon when you're developing. It will affect a little bit how we handle some of this stuff. Okay, right now it's completely empty. No fav icon, that's fine. So what I want to do in this front end is I want to have a list of users, okay. Users, set users, use state. And I'm going to put use state, and I'm going to start it off with an empty array. All right, start off with no users. Now what I can do here is I can say, json.stringify, users, and that'll give me that raw users list there. Not very useful though. Let's put this in a div. What I want to do, I'm actually going to add some users in here. Name Bob. Name Charles. And if I go here now, you can see that JSON. Well, I don't want the JSON. And we've covered this a little bit, but I'm going to cover it again. If you want to take any repeating like array or something like that and turn it into JavaScript or JSX, you can use the map command. So why are we going to use map, and how are we going to use it? So first of all, let's just do a forEach. Okay, user console.log user, and what that does is that's going to print out each individual user, Bob and Charles, right? It loops over them. That's what forEach does. What map does specifically is it's a transformative system. It doesn't change the existing object in the array, it just returns a new array. So what I can do, users, I could actually do something like this. I could say, okay, users components array, and then users component.push div user.name. This is completely legitimate. I can put JSX in this point. Now, if I console log users components, you see now I get a list of React elements, which is exactly what I would expect because I'm creating a React element for each one, right? And inside for each loop, I'm going over the user and I'm pushing this component in. This is something that I can now put down here, users components. Because remember, React can handle an array of components. It's perfectly comfortable with that. Let's see. Let's just put some special stuff in there. Username. And now you can see here's my two components. I add another user, Barbara. And now Barbara shows up there. So that's one way of doing it. Not necessarily the best way, right? So in this forEach, I could also just do something like this and say map and then return the div. How does that work? Well, remember map builds a new array of whatever you're returning. I'm returning a React component. The JSX here turns into a React component. So it's going to loop over every user. For each user, it's going to return a React component, and it's going to return an array made up of those components into user components. So you can see I reload this, and that works just as well. All three of those components are in there. But I can go one step further. I don't actually need this user's components. I can just take this whole thing, because React will take a map or an array. Oops. I can just copy this entire thing and just put it in there. Get rid of that, because those aren't valid anymore. I save this. And you can see, if I reload, no functional change. So this is the common way of handling this, because it's inside the same React or JSX structure. So you can see that it's there. What if I had an object, right? So what if for some reason my users were indexed by ID? So const users set users equals use state, and it was an object. 1 goes to name Bob. 2 goes to name Charles. And 3 name Barbara. All right. Well, that's not going to work the same way anymore. It's going to fail because it says user's map is not a function. Yeah, there's no map on an object. What we can do in this case is we can call, there's a function called object.keys. And what object.keys does is it actually returns an array of just the keys. So I could say object.keys users.map, and then this is going to be user ID. And then I actually have to grab the user by saying user equals user's user ID. If I do that, that works fine. The other thing you could do is you could say object.values and just do user as well if you don't care about the key. And that also works. So that's how that's if you want to loop over an object and grab the keys. I usually do object.keys because it's useful to have the key in most cases. Like you saw how that thing keeps complaining. No, nope, not that. This keeps complaining each key child in the list should have a unique key property. That will happen if you return an array in React. So the way you fix that is at the top level JSX element, you add a key property. And so I can just say user ID. And now you can see that error is gone. So if you ever see that error, it's not the biggest deal, just React likes it to be a little bit more optimized. So this is how you handle an object. If you're just doing an array, then you can just map the user directly. Put that back in there, user, like that. So that is how you handle users, or you handle doing multiple objects. We've covered it already. I just wanted to go over it again to make sure. Okay, let's say this is empty then. All right, nothing there. But let's say I want to do something special when it's empty. I want to show an empty state. I want to say like, hey, there are no users. Okay, there are no users. Well, that's great, except if I actually add a user. Oopsie, user ID is not defined. Right. I'll just put the name in there instead. It'll say user and there are no users at the same time. I don't want that. I don't want this to show up if there are users. So I could do something. I could say, okay, you know, show no users div equals, just do this. And I could start off with null, and if users.length equals 0, show no users div equals the JSX. And then I could just put that in here, show no users div. So now here it's not there. But if I get rid of this user, now it shows up. Because I'm basically saying, hey, this is null. React will accept a null as a child. It just doesn't display anything. So I'm saying, hey, if there are users, this is null. If users.length equals 0, then actually set this to a value. And I could actually do some shorthand on this too. I could say, you know, you use a trinary, users equals 0. If so, div otherwise null. So I can totally do that. That'll work just as well. But this is kind of messy, and I don't like trinaries. There is a special thing with JavaScript that if you have A and B, if A is true and B is true, the result is going to be B. So let's say let A equals 15, let B equals 20. If I say let C equals A and B are both true, the result is going to be B. If A is false, the result is going to be false. If B is false, the result is going to be false. But if both of them are truthy values, the result will always be B. B. The same value as B. With that in mind, I can actually do this. I don't need the trinary. What does that say? Well, if users.length equals 0, this is always truthy because it's an object that exists. So if this is true and this is true, then show users div is going to be this result. If users length is 1, let's say, then this is immediately false and show users div becomes false. So now you can see there are no users, but if I add, you know what? I'm going to put it here so I can comment it out. If I add Bob, it doesn't show up. Single line for it. Now, here's the other part that's fun. At this point, I don't need the variable. I could take this whole thing and just put it in here. The reason this is all working is because anything inside these curly braces here can be any JavaScript at all. Any valid JavaScript is fine. And if I do this, see, there are no users. I add the user back in, and now the user shows up and not that. So this is how we do conditionals in React. We do it with this format. You have sometimes one, sometimes two even. You could have a complicated conditional in here, and then the very end is going to be the element that you want to render. Oftentimes, you might see it done like this. This is just to make it clear where the JSX is. It's completely optional. I do it a lot just because that's how I learned. But again, completely optional. All right, so let's add in a quick form to add a user, and we'll talk a little bit about how to do APIs. All right, so what I've done now is I've added in a simple form with a submission handler on submit, which prevents the default and then just logs the temp name. Temp name is a specific state that I've got to keep track of this name. Remember, we need this so that we can actually use the name in our component. Otherwise, it's kind of stuck in the input field. Unlike regular DOM, we can't just call component.value not as easily. I have an input box that just takes in that value, changes that value, and a button to add. So let's see what we have here. If I type in Bob, add, it shows up in the console log. So that much is working. But now I want to actually call the API. So I'm going to use fetch to do that. All right, let's take a look. We're going to say fetch localhost 9090/user. Okay. And then our method is going to be post our let's see, headers. We're going to give a content type of let's see, application JSON. And then our body, it needs to be a string. So we're going to stringify name, temp name. And the reason is because our server expects a name, an object in the body that has a name. Okay. So let's see what we get here. Take a look at the network tab. I'm going to go to fetch XHR, Bob, add. Oh, I got a console log. Cannot load, because URL scheme not supported. It wants specifically HTTP. Now, you might be like, this isn't going to work for my production. And you're right. We will get to that. Okay, let's reload that. Bob, add, okay. Network. We posted our user, and we got a response. ID 1 of Bob. Well, that's cool and all. But what I would really like is if as soon as this fetch came back, we could reload these users, right? I also would really like it if those users would load in the beginning. But let's do this one first. Okay, so that then, honestly, after the then, I don't really care if the request is successful or not. I'm just going to reload the users anyway. So I'm going to call another fetch request. Localhost 9090 users. This is just going to be a regular post. This I actually do care about the response. So if result.ok, return result.json, then data. Let's just console log our data. And let's see what that does. So we're here, Bob. Okay. We add this. Ooh, this one failed. Why did that fail? Let's take a look at our backend. Nothing going wrong there. Request URL, original response. Oh, because I gave this. No, that doesn't make sense. Refer users. Didn't like something about that. Let's take a look at our server. Get users. That's fine. There's a status. There's JSON. Just doesn't seem to have liked that, does it? Well, let's take a look at why. Well, if I take a look here, I put an HTTPS. That's the problem. My server is not set up to handle the secure SSL port, so it just won't work with it. Let's try that again. Tom. Okay, now that works. My response from users comes back with Tom. Okay. And then there we go. Now I wonder what happened to Bob. I think my suspicion is that NodeMon is actually handling this source too, because it looks like this server's restarted quite a bit. I might want to change that a little bit, but for now it's okay. So now that we've got our data, what we're going to do is we're actually just going to call set users with it. Set users data. Sometimes you want to work with it and flip it around, do some stuff with it, but this is fine for now. Set users will cause this whole thing to re-render as appropriate. So let's take a look here. If I say Bob, add. Now you notice that there are no users. Immediately change to Bob. Tom. There's Tom. Barbara. There's Barbara. Pretty cool. So this is how you handle APIs. So the thing is, though, as soon as I load the page, like if I go here and I reload this page, there's no users. But if I add another one, well, now all the users show up. So they're kind of there, right? But they're just not there in the beginning. So I actually want to take this and put it in a use effect. Why use effect? Well, because use effects, I can set it to run once when the component mounts by giving it the empty array. If I put that in there now, load this. All right, so let me reload the page. I reload the page and you can see they're now back because now this fetch happens immediately as the page loads to get that data, but then also happens here as soon as I create the user. Problem is, now I've got duplicated content, right? So what I want to do is I want to actually take this and I want to make a function for it. Let's call this, make an anonymous function, fetch users. All right, that goes there. Whoops. And now I'm just going to call fetch users here. And down here, I can also call fetch users. All right, so that code is a little bit cleaner. If I go here now, let's add some in again. I reload, and again, it loads them. And as soon as I add new ones, it also reloads them. So this is how you handle APIs in React. Basically, you have your fetch, but you need to kind of wire it up to the state. A lot of times you wire it up to use effect. Things like that. Anyway, so what we've covered here is how to do map. We also covered map over objects in order to get that for looping in JSX. We covered conditionals in JSX. This is not the only conditional. Anything can go here. And then we covered how to handle APIs, as well as like how to do the submission, holding on to this data so you can pass it in the body, and then how to fetch that data when the component mounts. Anyway, I hope this is helpful, and I'll see you all next time.